Oklahoma, where the wind comes ripping up the trees. Oklahoma, where the wind comes ripping up your house. That's all I know of the Oklahoma song. And no, we're not talking Oklahoma the musical. We're talking Oklahoma the wrestler. And he was about as entertaining as Oklahoma the musical. So let's take you back to 1999, where we were all waiting for Y2K so the world would end and we could all get some rest. And the two main writers of WWE were Vince Russo and Ed Ferreira. And we all know them as the two worst writers in history. Besides, of course, that little kid who wrote that. Besides, of course, the guy who wrote that Christmas Shoes song. Because that song is the most annoying song in history. And they played it endlessly for years. And now all of us want to beat people with shoes for Christmas. So Vince Russo and Ed Ferreira were mad that WWE introduced SmackDown and they had a second show to write. And Vince Russo was like, let's get back at them by making fun of Jim Ross in meetings. So they did, and everybody laughed, and Vince McMahon laughed. And no one else laughed because they're all like, we actually respect Jim Ross. But Vince McMahon laughed, so it was all a good time. Because the boss laughs, everyone laughs. So then they started negotiating with WCW because they didn't want to put extra work in. Because they're lazy fucks. And they end up jumping ship to WCW because they took all the credit for the Attitude Era, which was actually none of their ideas. Instead, they came up with names like Icy McFreeze for Stone Cold Steve Austin. Actually, all credit to the Attitude Era goes to Vince Russo's dog Daggett, who stayed with WWE. So Vince Russo and Ed Ferreira decided to, when they went to WCW, they immediately started doing their Crash TV like the Attitude Era. And Ed Ferreira introduced a character making fun of Jim Ross, including his Bell's palsy, named Oklahoma. And he managed Dr. Death Steve Williams, who at one time was good friends with Jim Ross. And Jim Ross was kind of hurt by this because he thought they were friends of his, and then he seen they were mortal enemies of his, so he swore revenge and started hunting them. But shortly thereafter, Turner made them stop making fun of their Bell palsy, which means Turner wouldn't let us use a Parkinson's person as a vibrator. But don't worry, baby, you put a quarter in my ass, I'll let you use me as a vibrator. That joke just fell flat. I came up with that joke earlier. I'm like, this would be hilarious. And I'm like, boom, killed the joke. Okay. So anyways, so then Oklahoma started wrestling. Now Vince Russo's original plan was to give Oklahoma 3 world titles, including a clean win over Goldberg. Now I don't know if that was their original plan, but I'm thinking like Vince Russo, and I'm going, that's what we should do. Because that makes the most sense. So anyways, Oklahoma's finisher was to use barbecue sauce to defeat his opponents. Now, of course, he wasn't the first wrestler in history to use barbecue sauce to defeat his opponents. The first wrestler in history was Bob, King of the Barbecue, Hughes, who used barbecue sauce to defeat his opponents and was a huge face during the barbecue era of wrestling. His matches with Ed, the vegetarian Ali, were were huge matches, drew huge numbers during the barbecue era of wrestling. But later on, Jim Ross stole this from Oklahoma and used barbecue sauce to defeat his opponents, though Jim Ross was never a trained wrestler like Ed Ferreira. So he would use barbecue sauce to defeat his opponents because Jim Ross was trying to get his barbecue sauce in the stores nationwide, which nobody knew about. Except for a few people on the internet, and of course Vince Russo, Ed Ferreira, and JR. So, then Oklahoma won the Cruiserweight title, being the heaviest person in history to win the Cruiserweight title at 227 pounds. Now, of course, he looked like he was more at like 327 pounds, but I guess he was short. Of course, he had to give up the Cruiserweight title then because he was too damn fat to hold it. So later, after ratings didn't go up, WCW enacted a booking committee, which they put both Vince Russo and Ed Ferreira on. Vince Russo quit because he thought they were treating him like a babysitter. Ed Ferreira stayed, but they canceled the Oklahoma character because everyone else on the booking committee had respect for Jim Ross. And that is Oklahoma. Eventually, Jim Ross forgave them, and he fixed his relationship with Dr. Death because he held nothing against Dr. Death. Dr. Death was just doing what he was told. And that is Oklahoma. Was it better or worse than a tornado in Oklahoma? Probably worse. But what we learned from all this is don't make fun of Jim Ross. Because Jim Ross will eventually hunt you down, put a gun to your head, and make you piss yourself until you apologize to him and he forgives you. So join me later in the week for Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers, which sounds like the greatest film ever made, and I'm betting it is, though I haven't watched it yet. See ya!